Oh hi, it's Robbo again. Going to read one more time. Rocky Horror Picture Show, The Essay by Robbo. Riff Raff, by far, is my favorite character in Rocky Horror. At first he appears as a servant, submissively following the orders of his master, the Dr. Frankenfurter. Juxtaposed right next to him is Magenta, also subordinate, both of them serving with an air of labored resignation, not out of loyalty or respect for the Doctor. In fact, what we don't know is that the three of them are not even human. They are from the planet Transylvania, in the galaxy of transsexual. In the end, the Doctor's madcap spree into forbidden pleasure call for the powers that be to take away his command. Riff Raff and Magenta, now being in charge, carry out his death sentence and return to their home. This kind of story is not hard to find in the modern fiction of that era. It is an old story. It is the old question of what do civilized people do with those who break away from civilized norms. In Ken Kesey's book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the character McMurphy finds himself at odds with society for just being a man. The reason he was victimized was because, as a male individual, he refuses to be castrated. McMurphy represents a savage in terms of what other men from his times are because he has balls. This was not in itself a crime. The crime both the Doctor and McMurphy commit is that they believe they can do anything they want to. The Doctor was a pervert, a sweet transvestite, a man who wanted to give himself over to absolute pleasure. McMurphy was a hustler, a gambler, a womanizer. Both of them lived outside what was deemed normal and acceptable within the framework of civilization. But wait, you scream. You're comparing black comedy with satire. The very idea of Dr. Frankenfurter is ridiculous. At least a man like McMurphy could have actually existed. Well, let's look at another black comedy. Let's look at Alex DeLarge from A Clockwork Orange. Alex was a sadistic punk and a criminal who had an insatiable appetite for young women. He was a rapist and eventually murdered one of his victims. On the news, we hear of these kind of crimes being committed by men young and old, and it is obvious that society cannot tolerate it. Riff Raff's answer to this kind of behavior was to kill Dr. Frankenfurter. "You killed him," said Magenta. "I thought you liked them. They liked you." So Riff Raff, once he had command, became judge and jury and executioner. But what does this really say about him? In the moment that Riff Raff kills Frankenfurter, he is not simply doing his duty to society by executing a criminal. He is also taking out his revenge on the Doctor. Finally, after years of being handed the short end of the stick, he is given a club instead, and he wields this new power in all his righteousness and uses it to destroy the Doctor. The way Nurse Ratched destroys McMurphy, the way Alex is programmed to be made ill by violence, to the point where he can't even defend himself. One might ask, which is worse, the punishment or the crime? And that brings us to the very heart of this essay. In our society today, what are the implications of someone with a lifestyle like Dr. Frankenfurter? As I write this, it is almost 40 years since the release of Rocky Horror Picture Show. Today, there is a large number of people, even normal people, who can be examined in light of this movie. They are the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, and asexual. When I saw this movie for the first time in 1979, my favorite part was when Frankie sang, "Whatever happened to Fay Ray?" That delicate satin draped frame, as it clung to her thigh, how I started to sigh, 'cause I wanted to be dressed just the same. I was in the audience and I was like, "Can I try that, please?" It was me. Oddly enough, I was completely phobic of Frankie. It was Brad I could relate to, and without further ado, I will present to you Brad Majors, a 20th century, normal, heterosexual male. How many people have you ever met that really seem like Brad Majors? Well, you might say no one at all, because the character is so over the top as the straight-A student, but patriotic and all-American, and is all too tongue-in-cheek as presented in the context of the satire that is Rocky Horror. But I'm here to tell you that I am much more like Brad than I care to admit. The difference between Brad and I is I grew up at the beginning of an era of sexual liberation. What I did not know at the time was I needed gender liberation. Brad was never allowed to explore his sexuality. I did. Perhaps the fact that I saw Rocky Horror prompted that exploration. For Brad, being brought up as a Christian in small-town apple pie America with its 1950s morality, the only option he was allowed in terms of sex was to be a Janet-seeking missile. Brad's entire existence depends on him finding Janet, courting Janet, marrying Janet, siring Janet's children, and then getting lost in the garage with all the tools and the mower for the rest of his life. Then enters the doctor. How do you do? I see you met my faithful handy man. Well, when Brad is exposed to the doctor, what is it that really happens? To the audience, we are both embarrassed for Brad, but also at ourselves, because in the scene where Frankie seduces Brad, the movie puts us in Brad's place, and for a moment, no matter how straight you are, we all are enjoying it just as much as he is. The most uncomfortable part of that homophobic scene was the idea that if I ever was to admit to anyone that I thought it was sexy when Brad arched his back, I would be called a faggot. I tell my counselor almost all the time how much I wish I was gay. My life would be so much easier and I would be happy. But no amount of seduction by Frankie could ever change the fact that I really only want to wear his lingerie, not be underneath it. The movie implies that Brad is a little less than straight, but there is more. I was raised to be Brad. All my male friends were raised to be Brad. Most of them found Janet, got married, had kids, and I never saw them again. But I took a detour into deviant sexual behavior. I became a cross-dresser. What was really sad about that was I had a built-in switch that I adjusted as needed to go back and forth from femme to in-home. On the weekends, I would femme out in CD while listening to David Bowie's Aladdin Sane or The Man Who Sold the World. Then, the rest of the week, I'd be in Bowie mode, actually believing I was Brad or even could be, as I walked around Texas Tech and Lubbock in my punk clothes, doing my best to look like John Lennon or at least Ziggy Stardust. I was still a Janet-seeking missile, proving beyond any doubt that you could take Brad out of men's clothes, but you couldn't take the man out of Brad. This overlooked anomaly in my life caused me much grief, most notably because I was guilty of false advertising. I was not Brad. Once I refused one of my girlfriends to give me the key to her apartment, for I knew that while she was away at work, I would go in and try on all her clothes. You get the picture. The Rocky Horror Picture Show stands as a timeless reminder of how far transgender has come. The construct of Brad Major still exists in real life today, as I have described. I'm not finding fault with it. Someone has to sire all those children. But when I woke up from the nightmare of thinking I had to be Brad Majors, that is when my life really began. I started the essay off pointing out that society will not accept unacceptable behavior. But Brad has committed no crime, not even in Rocky Horror. Brad is a victim of being coerced, controlled, and manipulated. But Brad always will be until he decides for himself. As I said, however, Brad does not get to decide. Brad will always be coerced and controlled and manipulated, either at the hands of the doctor or by the society and civilization that programmed him. I hope it will be better next Saturday night.